Ah, I did push
There
start.
it is.
No?
You did.
Okay. I did. You did.
You did.
Anyway,
Good morning,
okay, okay.
everyone. We'll
Uh,
just let people get into the Zoom room here and then we will get started.
mm.
BJ, you want to do quick intros while people are coming in?
Oh, sure. Okay, yeah. Why is my anyway? People, hello. It's really nice to be here. As usual, we love these things. Welcome to another webinar. Quickie commenties. One is just to note, folks who've been here before will know this is very much a safe place. By that, we simply mean, you know, be kind and respectful. That's about it. Otherwise, any questions or comments are welcome here. This is really meant to be a place to talk about tricky subjects or complicated ones or ones that are hard to talk about in polite company or something like that. So anything goes. We'll cut to Sones in a second for some sort of technical details on how to interact with us. But today, before we do that, today I want to introduce Lisa. Lisa Paul is a longtime friend and colleague. I don't know when we first met Lisa. It feels like it's been a while, but I have no sense of time. So maybe it was 100 years ago. I
Just
think it's about
about.
100. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, so today Lisa is, well, I'll let her show some of her wares, including one of the most beautiful fun games in this goofy field of ours. But in general, Lisa's an expert, and we are together going to dive into advanced care planning. So, a relatively dry subject that thanks to Lisa has gotten a little more exciting, a little bit more engaging, and we'll kind of go through that today. But advanced care planning is, a really important subject. It just gets short shrift. Everyone knows it's really important to state your wishes for your medical care, but very few of us actually take the time to do it. And if we have done the advanced care directive, we'll talk about these details here. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but even if we have done it, very often it was 30 years ago and with a different cadre of friends and family around, et cetera. So there's a big subject, tends to be a little bit dry, but we're going to zhuzh it up a little bit today. It's really much more important than a piece of paper would have you believe. So that's a little intro. And then Lisa will come right back here. But first, let's get over to Sonia for some details on how to engage.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. So, as BJ mentioned, he and Lisa are going to go through some kind of level setting topics on advanced care planning conversations. And then after that, we will head to your questions. And there's two ways you can do that. You can click on the raise hand button and we'll unmute you and you can chat with Lisa and BJ. And if you'd prefer to not speak out loud, you can type it into the Q&A and I will read it to BJ and Lisa for you and they will answer that way. So two options. The chat is also open. So if anything comes up, while they're speaking and you want to just comment on it, please feel free. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sonia. And I always, as ever, a shout out to Sonia. If you like the artwork in the slides, that is thanks to Sonia. As ever, they're beautiful. Thank you, Sonia. Okay, Lisa, shall we get started? Um, so yeah, I mean, right, I kind of, as I said, an advanced directive ends up being a piece of paper often, or advanced care planning is a process to get to an advanced directive, among other things. But it's larger than that. So, one thing our slide already tells us, yes, it's about the details of what is discussed, but it's also just about having a conversation around difficult subject. And the conversation, the engagement, the interaction is so much part of its potency. So with that, what do you see from your angle, Lisa, on this point?
Yeah, well, I've worked in hospice and emergency medicine as a social worker for 18 years. And, both of those settings, that dealing with death is different, right? In the ER setting, it's often a medical crisis, a sudden death, or a big medical crisis that requires decisions to be made. Hospice,
Mm.
it's usually a slower process, not always, but slower process where there's a little bit more time for conversations. But in both of those settings, what I hear time and time again from family members is when they can recall a conversation that they had with their family member, and they can feel the feeling from that conversation because it's usually intense, that guides them to make decisions for them and gives them confidence. Okay, I know, because dad told me if I put a feeding tube in him, he was going to haunt me, right? So it was a conversation that was emotional, and these conversations tend to stick in our brains a little bit because we're not used to having them, and because they do tend to have an intensity to them. So we can recall these conversations where people share with us some of these wishes and their feelings on different medical interventions, and then we can make decisions aligned with those comments. And so, the piece of paper is so hard because what does that mean? And if, unless you heard your family member say something, people talk themselves out of what is written down all the time because they're interpreting it differently than the person who filled out the paperwork. So there's just so many, and quite honestly, I'm sure you know this, VJ, but someone comes into the ER, there's not usually an advanced directive on their chest to tell us what they want. It's usually who shows up in the hospital setting, in that crisis moment that we're going to turn to. And so, yeah, if that family member has had these conversations, then they're going to look at us with clarity, and it might be still difficult to tell us what they think we should do, how we should proceed. But if they haven't had the conversations, they're usually eyes are big and wide, they're frantic, there's a lot of opinions of family members if it's more than one person at the bedside, and then it gets really chaotic. And usually then everything is done because there's just not enough clarity to make a different decision. And our medical treatment is to do it all unless we're told differently. And quite honestly, that's how I see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a real, boy, there's a lot in there. I wonder if we should take a moment to define some terms a little bit, because I know we can take for granted a lot of this stuff that folks in the audience will know, but maybe not too. So let's just sort of clarify for a moment. So advanced directives, living wills. So could you just walk us through, give us a bullet real quick of what's an advanced directive? And is it different from a living will? And how does that relate to advanced care planning?
Yeah. So an advanced directive is a document that specifically appoints who you want to make medical decisions for you in the situation in which you can't make decisions for yourself. It also describes the type of treatment you would want. And there's a wide variety of advanced directives. Each state has a state-specific generic advanced directive. And then there's some more in-depth ones, like 5 wishes, prepare for your care. Those are 2 organizations who have, it's still a legal document. It's still an advanced directive, which is designating who you want to make decisions for you, but it also has just more layers and more information that you can put in there to help your family members, to help guide them. Now, a living will is usually part of an estate planning, and this is done with an attorney. And typically the living will, we can use those as an advanced directive if there isn't a separate advanced directive, if the family has that paperwork, but it tends to be a part of an attorney financial planning document, and not as, in my experience from what I've seen, not as thorough as the advanced care planning document. So I always encourage people to have both, as well as as you mentioned at the beginning, VJ, updating our advanced directives, because our health changes. And so what we want might change. The people who we designate, our relationships may change, or they might become too sick, or they themselves have passed. And so they can't be our decision maker anymore. So, yeah, so that's the important piece too, is a lot of people tell me, well, I've done my advanced care plan, and I'll ask them how long ago, and it's like 40 years. And, when they first got married or something like that. And it's like, well, I think some things have probably changed. Why don't we take a look at that, So that's the beginning of
Right
those.
on.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's super helpful. So, and folks out there, we will do sort of the anatomy of advanced directives and that clerical piece. It's really an important part of this puzzle to protect your wishes. But as you said, Lisa, even if you've done that work and it's up to date, oftentimes emergencies happen emergently, and you're not walking around with your advanced directive, and it's not likely that you're going to show up in an ER or an ambulance with such a document. So there's a lot to say about how oftentimes, even if you do show up with an advanced directive, whether or not it gets honored is another question. So I just want to note those because it's big stuff and it's tangential to what we're going to talk about today. So with that, we'll kind of put the clerical bits out of the way. Just know, folks, we'll talk about them in another time in more detail. And if questions arise today, that's great too. But just want to name some stuff there. But otherwise, so forms notwithstanding, the conversation itself, advanced care planning. Well, for one, it's one thing to note is the title itself, advanced care. Well, so you're talking about the care you would want down the road in advance of actually getting the care. So just want to note that that's a little bit of a mind bender already as we sit here today, perhaps in various stages of health and have a certain outlook. You may feel one way about your future versus if you've been dealing with chronic illness for years or pretty exhausted, treatment list is getting smaller and smaller, et cetera. Well, you might feel very differently about the care you're going to want down the road. So just to name this a little bit, you're talking about anything in advance of it actually happening is inherently a little tricky. Is that a fair statement, Lisa?
It is. And I think it's easy at times to say what I would do in this situation as a healthy 47-year-old. But I imagine and I know that how I think about things, what I predict of myself is going to change once I'm there, and I think again, that's why when we can get comfortable talking, and that's really what this is. This is getting comfortable talking about end of life and death and dying. And I think the reasons that we don't have these conversations is our cultural discomfort with aging, illness, and death. And so really the advanced care planning is really just being open and having conversations about what matters most to you, and how people can honor and take care of you.
Beautiful. Yeah, and that's right. I mean, these are hard conversations in part because we never have them. And so they get deferred, pressure builds, et cetera. And then as you set us up earlier, without these conversations, however awkward they can be and however many reasons you might have for avoiding them, well, just to state here, there's two big reasons to have these conversations, even though they can be uncomfortable. One is, as you pointed to us, is just to get more comfortable with the subject matter. We're all heading that way. We're all heading for various degrees of loss and eventually for death ourselves, each of us, all of us, et cetera. So given that reality, the range of how our end of our lives can play out is pretty profound. And if we don't talk about these things and we don't think about this phase of life, well, for one, we're going to miss out on what it has to teach us. As you and I know well, daring to have these conversations about ourselves and with others allows us to see the subject a little bit more clearly, to see ourselves in it a little bit more clearly, to see reality a little bit more clearly, and then therefore to receive the lessons that it has to show us. For me, interdependence, the relative importance of myself, but also unimportance of myself in the big picture and how I'm part of something larger. And yes, I matter, but everything matters, and all this sort of perspective making that happens. You don't really get there until you put yourself in this big frame. So one is to have these conversations because they will feed your life. You will likely live a little bit different, a little bit better if you're conscious about where you're headed. So that's one point. A second point you've already kind of mentioned here, and I just want to pull it out, is if you don't state your wishes, the healthcare system, for suppose good reason, is designed to go to default mode. If we can't have this conversation about what you may or may not want, about what you're willing to live with and not, et cetera, about how you want to leave this planet, well, without you telling me, then I'm just going to, as your physician, I am obligated to go to the defaults in the system. And the defaults in the system are, as you say, just do more, do everything possible. Tubes, machines, anything to keep your heart beating is essentially the default mode. The problem is many of us don't wish for that when our time comes. And so anyway, long-winded way of saying these are the reasons to have these conversations, at least. I mean, there may be other reasons too.
Yeah. Well, it's really hard to honor your wishes when we don't know what they are, and I think
Yeah,
that's
right.
it's
Right.
I think we all want who we are to be taken into account. We want our end of life to go in a
Mhm.
certain way. We've all at least had some imaginings of that. But unless we share that with the people around us, um, who are going to be there, potentially in that ER room, then they can't read our minds. And the medical
Mhm.
system, as you said, will err on the side of default. But then your family members are going to err on the side of what they would do for themselves, typically. I mean, as not always, but people fill in the blanks with their own perspective. And
Mhm.
when there's multiple family members, they're filling in the blanks from different areas. And then we have, um,
Mhm.
conflict. We have family disagreements over how, whether mom should go on hospice or not. All of these things that become really sticky and challenging for your family when your family is having some anticipatory grief. They're going through a lot as is the person experiencing it.
Mhm.
Um, but it's just it's the chaos
Mhm.
is much more elevated when we haven't had these conversations. I mean, I walk into a hospice room or a
Yeah.
hospice, I'm still doing in-home hospice with families, and I'll walk into someone's house, and typically within 5 minutes, I can tell if there's been conversations or not. There's a
Mhm.
frenzy,
Mhm.
an anxiety, a avoidance, when death is not a conversation. And when it's been discussed,
Mhm.
when there's a mortuary plan in place, when there's paperwork that's done, when there's been conversations, there's still obviously a lot of feelings, but it's a calmness. There's more of a certainty
Mhm.
of the plan and the road ahead. And it's such a gift. I mean,
Mhm.
when I walk into these homes, it's like, ah, okay, let's
Mhm.
talk. Let's talk about what's going on.
Mhm.
And the beautiful conversations, as
Yeah.
we can have, right? I mean, it's just,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, they could be hard and awesome, often such beautiful exchanges, right? So I don't want to overstate how difficult and load us all up to even avoid them even further, but they can be such beautiful conversations once you crack the plane, kind of get in there. And you also mentioned something here I just want to highlight, and then we should move off the slide. I keep talking to here, but um, there's sort of what you might want to happen. Do you want a feeding tube or not? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But as you pointed out earlier, aside from the forms, the emotion, the relational dynamics, the things that can transpire, that get translated between people that don't ever make it their way to a form or a page, or where a lot of the action is, a lot of where the emotion is. You get a feel for the how important this or that detail is to a person, etc. So anyway, the conversations can be rich, can be beautiful, and they can inform dramatically in ways a form never could. And also, one more thing in there too, another pitfall if you don't have these conversations. Yes, your family members or friends, wherever your healthcare proxy or next of kin is, if they have to make decisions on your behalf, if there's no information, they'll likely fill it with what they might want to have happen, as you said. And often, as often perhaps, guilt sort of starts ruling roost. Like, what am I going to feel less bad about? If I elect for mom to not have this or that treatment in the setting of a stroke or something because something's telling me that isn't what she would want, but that feels like doing less. That feels like telling the doctors to let her die, which can feel really hard to do, even if we sense that's what mom really wants. But if she's not told us that, gosh, I'm going to barricade against the potential for regret there and just err on the side of keeping mom alive. So that happens a lot. Guilt rushes in and then rules the day, which is, as a way of moving through the world, guilt tends to not be a great lead, let's just say. So
Oh,
gosh,
that's so
any
true.
more to say? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just so true. And I think we'll get to another slide about,
Yeah.
how this impacts grief, but the guilt piece is, you really nailed it with
Yeah.
that, because I see that a lot, especially in the ER and ICU setting. Yeah.
Can I interrupt you
Yeah.
too? We had a hand up while you were speaking. Are you okay to
Sure.
just,
Sure.
break with tradition and
Yeah.
go to a quick question? JS, I just
Sure.
wanted to, maybe you had something that was relevant to what we were talking about. You might have to unmute yourself on your end, JS. Okay, I can also come back. All right. I am. JS, we'll come back to you. Thanks, guys, for doing that.
Okay. So, all right, then back. I was just looking at the chats real quick while we were paused. Okay, we'll circle around. Lots going on. Okay. Here too, gosh, we spent a fair amount of time on that first slide, and we kind of talked about this, but I do think, again, besides the sort of data that needs to be transmitted around healthcare decisions and wishes, there's the emotional piece that goes with it, the felt experience, and how we might make dying easier or harder on ourselves and our families by having these conversations. And you've also touched on this point that the conversation, in a sense, the subject of the conversation is a little bit of a Trojan horse of sorts. Yes, it matters what you're talking about, as we're saying. The content of these conversations really matters. It's a great consequence. And it's not the only thing going on there. Is what's happening by daring to walk into these difficult situations is you're forging deeper connections with people. It seems. And that is also part of the sort of upshot of daring to go there. Brings you closer to people you know and love. Um, is that, I wonder sometimes why we do this work. I think for myself, sometimes I feel like a little bit of junkie, an intimacy junkie. I think a lot of us at Mental Health are. We kind of looking to feel this connected place. So that confession aside, how about for you, Lisa? I bet you've seen some real beautiful connections play out.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Vijay, in terms of, when I'm able to have a conversation with someone approaching end of life, and we're really talking about their fears and their hopes and their worries about their family members, and it's all coming out there. There's such I have such a fondness in that moment. There's such a deepening of, and such a connection to humanity when we're talking like so vulnerably. And I think you touched on, there's a lot of bravery. You have to have courage to have these conversations. I have supervised a lot of social work interns in hospice, and, you know, they'll tend to want to talk about symptoms and caregiving and all the nuts and bolts, and okay, we did what we needed to do. And so it takes courage to approach someone and ask how they're feeling about their prognosis, what today is like for them. And and I think that even end of life professionals will sometimes err on the side of not having those conversations. And we really miss out on, first of all, we can model that for the family. We can demonstrate that it's okay to bring this up. And then I think we get to have these deep conversations, and hopefully bring in the other family members. So then when we leave, they're continuing the conversations. Because I had this one hospice patient whose daughter, she was such a good caregiver. She took care of everything. She was a little bee buzzing about all the time, making sure her mom's needs were met, but she wouldn't sit with her and talk with her. And the patient kept telling me she just won't talk. And finally, I went one week and she said that she had screamed at her to stop, sit down and listen to me. And had a breakthrough. It took the mom kind of demanding to the daughter, you will listen to me and we're going to have this conversation. And then they began having these really rich conversations. And the daughter, when I talked to her after her mom died, she said, I'm so glad my mom got a little hair in her bonnet or bee in her bonnet or whatever. And sat me down and made me have that conversation, because it opened up something in our relationship. And I felt so close to her when she died. And I think that's, a piece that we don't often really spend time thinking about, but this is very precious time at end of life. It's very, there's only so much availability and time to have these kind of conversations. And when we can do it, it's just helps our grief, I think. Yeah.
Amen. And I think of, whatever spirituality is, I think for my purposes, it has something to do with just the poignancy of feeling connected. So this connecting thing, and a lot can be transmitted to those connections, sorrows, joys, all sorts of things. But there seems to be something inherently good about the feeling of being connected, or the truth of being connected. And as you're pointing, by daring to have these conversations and daring to talk about these issues, for all the reasons we've already said, you're also signaling care to someone, to another being. Like, I care enough about my life, about your life, about you, about this relationship, to actually look at this bigger reality together. There's something inherently bold and pretty loving about it. And that connection that will likely come from breaking this particular glass, you might say is worth it all by itself, no matter whatever information gets transmitted. So anyway, a very important point. Okay, let's move us along. Oh, Sons, or JS, are you out there? You want to jump in with that question?
Let's see. Let's oh, JS, you there?
It was a mistake. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go on.
No problem.
All right.
We're going to keep calling on you.
Yeah, exactly. We want to be connected to you, JS. Okay. All right, Lisa. Back to us here. Grief. You mentioned grief, boy. Biggie. But what do you see? So for families who have, and by the way, when we say family, we mean by blood or by choice. So
Right.
your inner circle, whether it's just you or 20 of friends, whatever it is. So you touched on this. I think I heard you, but and I think I know the answer. But when you see families who have done this kind of homework, dare to go there, talk about these things, and then once the death happens, how do you see the effect on the bereavement process for families who have had these conversations versus those who have not?
Yeah, there's so much second guessing in grief. Um,
Mhm.
we don't get a second chance to care for someone as they're dying, and so
Mm,
we tend to second guess ourselves with the decisions made, with the conversations had, and in my experience, it is far more often that people are second guessing, um, and wishing that they had had
mm,
conversations. Um, it's more about the
mhm,
things left unsaid. It's more about I never really talked to my
mhm,
mom about what she was going through, or we never had a conversation about some of these really important things, like we never talked about how she felt about pain medication, and I was afraid of morphine, and so I
mhm,
didn't want to use it, and now I'm worried that my mom died in pain and it's my fault. Um,
mm,
so there's a lot of these regrets and second guessing and things in our grief experience that we can't get rid of. I mean, there's always going to be questions and what ifs, and
mhm,
um, but I think the more information we have from our family member about what they would want, and even this also comes to some of the tasks at hand. I mean, I've talked to a lot of angry family members, again, using the term family uh, loosely, who
mhm,
are telling me, my dad was so organized and I really thought he had all this together, but he's left me a mess. I can't find
mm,
the titles to the house. I don't know where, I think he has a life insurance policy. I can't find it. There's no passwords. I mean, the task that people have to do in grief is so exhausting and cumbersome in terms of what you have to handle. And when we do kind of leave a lot undone and a little bit of a mess, it impacts those grievers and their
mm.
stress and all of these things. And so, you
Yeah,
know, it's difficult to have these conversations. It's difficult to get yourself to, you know, write down all your passwords and all these things. But I think when we really think about the people left behind and what we hope for them, uh, it can be a nice motivator to want to take care of
mm,
people. It's a way to
yeah,
continue taking care of people after you're gone, is to have things a little bit settled for them.
yeah. And as you're pointing, it's a spectrum, right? It's not like if you have these conversations, document your wishes, then everything's easy, great, and your grief will be just frictionless and no regrets. That's not on the table.
Yeah.
But so it's just we want to say it's more of it's more of a spectrum.
Mhm.
You're a little less likely to suffer unnecessarily this way. Your family's a little bit more likely to have a little bit of a sort of clean sorrow, not recrimination, second guessing decisions, etc. So it's magical, but let's be clear too. There's no obviating sorrow and sadness in this picture. We're just talking about making things a little bit easier or harder, one way or another. So just to level set. Um, but seem extremely important when you're in the throes of grief or if life is just feeling it's just so you're so bereft, you know, a smaller to-do list or being able to remember that this is, that you acted in what mom with in accordance with her mom's own wishes or whatever it is. Those what might feel like relatively small moments can feel enormous. So I also want to be careful when us, we're talking about ways that we can all kind of approach our care in advance and why it's important, both for ourselves as patients as well as family members. Yes, yes, yes. But two things I just want to make sure are really clear. One is, even if you do these things perfectly, death and dying and loss and grief, et cetera, just not easy. It's not going to be a picnic, period. But the other thing I also want to take note here together, Lisa, is as we talk about the way things can go, with extra effort and a little luck and some good timing, etc. But for those of us who are sitting here listening to this, myself included, when we look back on deaths or losses prior in our lives, and we didn't have these conversations, or we never got to it for one reason or another, I also wanted to speak to that piece of us too. Yes, these are important conversations. Yes, this can help. But again, if we just didn't get there, dying is a natural event. We've been doing it for eons. You didn't necessarily miss out on everything. Even if you'd had these conversations, I bet you $1,000,000 you would find something to regret, etc. So I'm just trying to find a right balance point so we don't accidentally load each other up to feel like we're failing if we didn't get to this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And and not everyone is willing to,
Mhm.
I can have my
Yeah.
ideas about what, when my mother-in-law was dying, you know, I I was determined I was going to give her the perfect death. I work in this space and
Mhm.
she's going to make a legacy video for my son and we're going to do all these things.
Mhm.
Um, it was very, uh, and I say I'm humbled in that experience of, um, how arrogant I was to come into her dying
Mhm.
experience with my ideas about what this was going to look like, because that wasn't her ideas. And
Mhm.
and so, to your point, um, as a social worker, I believe in self-autonomy. I believe in people's right to self-determination. And for some people, having these conversations for a lot of reasons is too distressing. And that's okay too.
Mhm.
You know, um, and if you weren't able to have a conversation with a family member before they died, um, there's that's okay too. They may not have wanted to, you weren't at a place to be able to. There's so many factors. And so, um,
Mhm.
I think what we can think about is, you know, the more information we have and the more opportunities to think about these things differently, um, we're all going to continue to experience losses in our life. And so, we take what we feel good about, and we learn from what we don't feel good about, and we just continue navigating to the best of our ability, because this is all really
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah.
It's
Amen.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lisa. That's very helpful to hear. Um, okay. Mhm. Let's keep moving, huh? Um, hmm, yeah. What's this one say to you, my friend?
Well, I think it's easier to talk about advanced care planning when we don't expect to be approaching end of life soon. Um,
Mm.
you know, it's easier to kind of think about things abstractly rather than when we're facing them. And so in my experience, it's often that family members aren't, as we were just discussing, they're struggling so much with talking about what's going on, and acknowledging
Mhm.
kind of the elephant in the room. And it can lead to the person who's experiencing end of life and having all of these thoughts and feelings. It can be isolating and lonely. And so,
Mm.
I hear that from people a lot. No one will talk to me about this. And and as we were saying before, I think what's important to think about is if you're not able to talk to your family member with serious illness about how they're feeling about their prognosis, how they're feeling about what they want at end of life, there's lots of people who can help support them. And so, we're in a beautiful moment of death doulas, of expanding of hospice and palliative care. And so I encourage end of life professionals, doulas, and all the people in this space to also be brave and actually talk with people about what's going on, because it isn't always the family that can. And I do think that this is how we can reduce the isolation that some people feel as they approach end of life.
Right on. And as you're talking, I'm realizing, this all this stuff's exquisite too. Like you shared, some folks, they're just not talkers, and so much of, there's a lot going on beyond the word, right? And we communicate in all kinds of ways. We share in all kinds of ways, not just sort of speaking on the nose about death or whatever else. So I guess one it starts getting into something a little bit more subtle. But as we're saying, as a well-intended social worker or clinician of any stripe or family member, knowing as we do that these conversations tend to help in all the ways we've said. So I've seen sometimes sort of, armed with that knowledge, I've seen folks well-intended kind of go into a patient meeting with a patient, a family, and kind of ramming a, codes, a code discussion or goals of care conversation, advanced care planning, advanced directives. These are all sort of in the same neighborhood. And sort of ramming the truth of prognosis and forcing a conversation. And honestly, I've seen that happen. I've done that myself, again, because I thought I was doing something, so I was on a mission. But I've also come to see that I can actually do harm that way, forcing a conversation when someone's not ready to have it, or when their support person isn't there, or whatever else. So it just kind of deepening into the subject a little bit. Nothing is all good or all bad, including advanced care planning conversations. So there's a timing to it. There's a way to do it. There's a piecemeal. Sometimes you can do 10 minutes here or there before exhaustion sets in or whatever else, or anxiety comes up. So you and I are both big believers in having the conversation. Yes. And there's nuance here too. And you can actually do harm by forcing it when they're not ready. Yeah. So that loneliness can come up by as a patient sitting there and everyone wants to talk to me about this thing that I don't want to talk about. That can be lonely making, or oftentimes the other way. I would love to talk about the reality I'm sitting in, but no one will share it with me. It can go either direction.
Yeah. That's very true. And I think, truthfully, I think it takes quite a bit of experience to differentiate and you'll never get it all right. But I do think the more conversations and opportunities as humans that we can learn, we learn from oh yeah, that I went too fast too quickly. The family wasn't ready for that conversation. So yeah, I can appreciate that.
Yeah. And that's why so much of this is, yes, daring to speak up, but lots of it daring to listen and in real time really feel what's going on here. It's just like a real skill, a craft that's practiced over time and never, ever quite perfect. So yeah, I think that sounds good. There's a lot more to discuss here. All these are tips of icebergs, but maybe we'll leave it at that for now and keep rolling. I want to make sure we get a ton of questions. And to the death deck too. Should we, what time is it? I don't have my clock. How are we doing on time out there, Sones?
We've got about 12 minutes. Lisa, are you okay to go a little bit over if we need to? Get a little extra time? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I definitely do want to do this. This is a the fun part.
Yeah, this is fun. Yeah.
Right.
So do you want to tell us about Death Deck, Lisa?
Yeah. Yeah, so the Death Deck, well, we have two now. We have the Death Deck and the EOL Deck. So the Death Deck is our original game that we launched in 2018 to try to help give people an opportunity to practice talking about death and dying. And we use humor and multiple choice questions to lighten up the topic. And this originated when I was the hospice social worker for Lori, well, for her husband, Joe, who died of pancreatic cancer in his early 40s. And so he was on service with us for about 2 weeks, and it was really chaotic. Joe's parents were involved in decision making, as was Lori, and there were siblings, and there was a lot of difference of opinions about what should happen and how much medications he would want and whether he would want everyone there or not, and the kids being involved. And so later, a few years after I stopped providing bereavement support for Lori, she reached out to me and said she was writing a book and could we get together? And we developed a friendship, which she's my only hospice friend I've made outside of she's the exception, but she, we decided we wanted to create something that would try to reach people before they were in Joe's situation, so that people wouldn't have that chaotic end of life. And so, it's been so fun to play across the country and to engage people in these conversations. And then last year we launched the EOL Deck after, kind of realizing that when end of life is coming sooner, we want to be more, we want to have a different tone than some of there's a lot of humor in the Death Deck. And so we wanted a different tone for the end of life deck. And so we really dig into end of life preferences with the end of life deck. Still multiple choice, because that gives us a chance for people to answer easier. But I'm going to ask you a couple questions from the Death Deck, DJ, and then we'll have a little conversation. So here's the first one. Growing up, my family dealt with death, A, by talking openly, sharing feelings, stories, maybe some dark humor. B, in a no-nonsense sort of way. Shit happens, you move on. Or C, keeping it bottled up and avoiding any discussion. What answer would you align yourself with?
It's interesting, and I've not thought about this as you're asking that question, though, of just in helping me realize how my own family, my mother and father and my sister, older sister Lisa, how we evolved. So there was a period. So the true answer is really all of the above. It depends when you would have asked my family. We've definitely come around to it being more like A. Through our own experiences, through my own sister's death, through all sorts of things, you kind of come around to some of the absurdity of life and how, can sort of, there are no sacred cows. And right now it feels like we've arrived as a family where we can really kind of talk about anything to a point. So it sort of depends when you ask the answer for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can
Sorry, just to make that, in case that wasn't clear, more historically, like earlier on, it would have been C. Was it C? Like we didn't
all
talk about it
bottled
at
up.
all. It was all bottled up, and it was a non-thing, as though it didn't exist. My grandmother's death when I was 7 or 8 changed that for a moment. There was a sort of an openness. I remember the decision to let me see her body in the casket was a big one. So anyway, back to this whole thing evolved within my family. Starting to repeat.
Well, I imagine your work has been has led to that, or at least influenced some of those conversations.
For sure. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I grew up on a farm, so mine was kind of the no nonsense, like uh animals die, people die, we all live, we all die.
Mhm.
But my dad also had a little bit of
Mhm.
dark humor, so he was always threatening, if you don't do this, you're out of the will. There were a lot of death jokes in my family, which I think led me to here today. So I have another one for you. If given a choice to watch how others grieve you at your funeral, would you? A, yes, that would be amazing. B, I try it, but if they get too sad or suspiciously happy, I'm out. Or C, no, that would be crushing.
Hmm. Wow. Ooh, it's a doozy. So I got injured in college. It's a story that's out there. My own kind of near death moment. And one of the things that became clearly kind of amazing to me about one of the upshots of that experience pretty quickly for me was the feeling. I think I used to say something like, well, I got this sort of magical snapshot, this little window into who would have shown up to my funeral, essentially. And I remember that feeling really good at the time. I remember I got a few cards in the mail at the hospital, and I was trying to like meet them out sort of one every few days. So I had something to look forward to. And my mom just looked at me like, "You're crazy. They're like a box of them here." It's like, I just remember being so moved. So I'm just harkening on that story because I have an experience in my life that's a little bit like that, and it sort of answered my question, which is I was so glad to see. I was so moved to see who showed up. And some people didn't too. It wasn't all loveliness. Some people didn't too. And but it all felt like a window into a truth that I felt lucky to glimpse. So if I can extrapolate from that experience, my answer to your question is I think that'd be an amazing window that I would look through. It might feel really hard and horrible in some ways and magical in other ways to do so. But I think I'd want to know. I think this subject makes me just want to see whatever is the truth. I just want to see it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I feel similarly. I feel too curious
Mhm.
about relationships, about life. And so I think if there was a door and it was an opportunity, I would have to at least peek on in that door and see what was going on.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So should we start questions or one more card?
Eh, yeah, I guess. So
What do you
what do you think, Sonia?
Yeah, let's go to
What's
questions.
out
I
there?
or I love these
Yeah,
cards. Lisa, we might have to just put
me
some
too.
prompts in
We
the
should have cut to
outreach.
him sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
BJ, will you close the slides
yeah.
while I get to the
Oh, sure.
questions?
Yeah, yeah.
Alan, you have had your hand up for quite a while. Thank you for your patience. You may need to unmute yourself on your end.
Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Alan Buquerque. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Sonia. Hi, BJ. I met you
Alan.
in Texas at a film festival, and I spoke there about like facing the sum of all fears. And then I did write the advanced directive with help of a mental counselor, and and my will and stuff. My main question is something that you talked about early, which was I don't really have a family, but I have people of origin, and I'm very concerned that they would step in, claiming some legal authority, uh, and not and my advance directive would not be respected at all. I'm sad to say they would probably make decisions to hasten my death out of thinking they would be getting some sort of inheritance. Uh, and yeah, I saw them do that with other relatives. Um,
Mm.
is there is there are there, could you recommend ways that, or places that I could go to shore up the legality of my advance directive and protect that situation from happening?
Oh, I'm so sorry that that's a significant fear for you, Alan. That's really tough. And you're not the first person. I've heard this before. I think our families of origin are not always the people we want making decisions for us. So doing your advance directive is a great step. I think making sure that your decision makers are people who live locally is really important, because if your family shows up and this person's on the phone, that's going to create more likelihood that the medical professionals would listen to the people in the room, just out of how it works. So making sure that your decision maker is local, that they have a copy of the advance directive. I would also keep a copy of it on your phone. You can even take a picture, have it in a file. There are more advanced directive online tools coming out that are also helpful. Having it with your medical professionals and the hospital you're more likely to go to also helps disseminate it. Talk about it with everyone you know, keep talking. If you're I would encourage you, if you're able, to tell your family that they're not the decision makers. I've had people who they didn't know that they weren't, and they assumed that they were. So I know that might be kind of delicate, but if you're able to let them know who the decision maker is, and that's out in the open, up front, that may also help too. I don't know if you have any ideas.
Yeah. No, and Alan, hey, good to hear your voice again, buddy. Thank you as ever for jumping in here. Yeah, I agree with everything that Lisa said. I mean, this is in a sense why an advance directive is so important, because otherwise things naturally go to next of kin. But this is another reason why such a document is really powerful, is you get to say. So again, Lisa's points of picking a proxy or proxies that are local, making sure to share this advanced directive with your health system. Ideally, more and more health systems can upload it into their computer, into their electronic medical record. My directives and other organizations keep them in a vault in the cloud, so you can access them anywhere. Keeping a picture on your phone is very smart. I'm just repeating what Lisa said, just for effect or for emphasis. And if it doesn't feel right to talk to your family directly about this concern, which I can imagine it not, but in the advanced directive, you might write a little addendum and say that specifically to this, if family members show up at my bedside, please be aware, please be sensitive to the fact that I still do not want them making decisions on my behalf, et cetera. Something like that. You can speak to it right in the body of the advanced directive, which might help. Lastly, we didn't mention the PULST or the MULST form, which is it's a slight, we'll talk about that in another webinar, but that's another document where you get to name that healthcare proxy. It has a sort of, has a different level of protection around it than a standard advance directive. And if all of these documents are consistent naming the same proxy again and again, and if you've told your doctor, if your doctor already knows about this, you're about as bulletproof as it gets, I would say, Alan. I'm not aware of anything else that could be done, but that should be plenty.
That is a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and you can also
keep,
that PULSE document people will often put it on their fridge, so that that is where emergency 911's called. That's where they're going to look. Typically, it's a nice pink paper in most states that shows this is what I want and this is the person. And so if you are at a point in your life, which again, as BJ said, the pulse is a little bit different. It is usually for people with serious illness or frailty in their health status. And so that is a physician order for medical treatment. And so it is, I would say, more respected or more front of mind for people to follow those orders.
For doctors specifically and health systems to follow those orders, ERs, et cetera.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
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 We did have a question come in. Noha said, what about advanced directives when traveling?
I don't know if you have thoughts on that one, Lisa. I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure each state has an advanced directive, but they all sort of mirror each other. I don't know what the cross-state laws might have to say. I think you'd be protected. I don't know. Do you know, Lisa?
I don't know with absolute certainty, but
Mhm.
I believe the same as you're saying. I think you would be protected. Now, if you were moving to another state or country, then you would want to complete a new advanced directive in that state just for certainty. But if let's say you were just traveling for a couple weeks, I would encourage you to bring it with you or keep it on your phone.
Yeah.
Talked about, but you should be covered if it's just a traveling situation. Medical professionals are not, we're looking at, oh, maybe Joan has an answer here in the chat.
Yeah, Joan said, what I've heard from an attorney is healthcare providers would rather have a directive than not have one, which I totally agree with both of you. I think as long as you have it and you're traveling, they're going to see that and be like, great, this is what we're going to follow. No one's going to say, oh, this isn't our state specific while you're on vacation, therefore we're not going to follow it. I think they'd be happy to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more we talk this out, I'm almost certain about this. Yeah, I'm almost certain that this would be fine. And the 5 wishes, for example, that very often use commercial advanced directive product is not state specific. So I think we're fine. And Noha, to your point, reminding us about my directives and other organizations, it's online vaults that you can stick them in the cloud and then they're accessible from wherever you are. And to the point is, besides the legal binding nature of this, most any treating physician in an ER, if you show up at their hospital, is just going to love to have any guidance from you in any form. So an advanced directive is likely to be very welcome, whatever state it comes from.
Yeah. I'm going to do one plug for super old school, just printing and putting it on your person, because the last thing you want to do in an emergency in another state at a hospital is talk about getting into the cloud. So I'm just going to put that up there.
Yeah. What was your Wi-Fi password?
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
It's often not reception in the
bleeding out.
Yeah. It looks like we don't have any more hands or questions. Lisa, I'm wondering, I'm kind of dying for more questions. Do you want to just end it with one of the Death Deck questions for all of us to ponder as we go into our weekend?
Good thinking, Sons. Yeah.
Okay. How about, I think writing my own obituary is helpful. Nobody knows me like I do. B, conceited. Let my loved ones decide what to say. Or C, morbid. Why would anyone do that?
Are we all just going to think of this on our own?
Yeah, I think so, right? Wasn't that the idea? Or did you want to answer, Sons?
Yeah, Sonia, what's your answer?
I don't think I'd want to, but I don't think it's morbid or conceited, but it seems like I'm gone now, so I'd rather have it written through the eyes of other people. But I kind of love the idea of having 2, mine next to someone else's.
I've seen some really beautiful kind of letters that are then made into an obituary of sorts, where the person writes kind of a lasting message that I found to be kind of tender when people are able to do that. I love an obituary that has some humor and some real personality to it. So
Mhm.
I think that I've gone back and forth on this. I will say, I asked this question at one of our community engagements to a young man in his 20s, and he told me that he's been writing, he was in recovery, and he said every year he writes his own obituary to take a look at his life and make sure that it aligns with what his values are and how he wants to be remembered. And I thought that that was a really interesting and kind of beautiful exercise. So I continue to think about that as an exercise for myself and kind of this reflecting on our lives.
Mm.
I love that.
Beautiful.
A
And
hand went
all
up
great
during.
it's all,
Oh, sorry, BJ.
yeah, Rebecca. Well, no, I was just going to say it's also making the point that if you don't dare to think about these things or talk about these things, then you don't get to these kind of cool, creative, next level thoughts. So you're kind of making the point too as we go. But there's Rebecca one. Hi, Rebecca.
Well, Lisa, do you have a few more minutes? I don't want to.
Mhm.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
good.
Rebecca, there
I'll
you
make
are.
this quick. Lisa and BJ, thank you as always.
Mm.
Lisa, you spoke about the person at the end of their lives wanting to take care of their loved ones. And I think writing your own obituary is kind of the essence of that act, because having been in situations where an obituary needed to be written for people very close to me, it's kind of a burden. It's a tough thing to do. And if that can be part of the process of advanced directing your loved ones, that's another gift, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A gift, yes. I do think that these tasks, these acts that we do to try to ease the burden later are gifts, and when we're able to do them. I've written obituaries as well, and trying to think about what would be most important to the person, to my grandma, to my mother-in-law, and again, that's where the second guessing kind of comes in. What is most important to them to acknowledge in the obituary? So I hear your point for sure.
Well, it's totally
Me too.
it's kind of extolling virtues that the individual, him or herself, wouldn't necessarily write down. And so sometimes I feel like obituaries are not accurate because they're not written. Sometimes the words are not words that the person who we're eulogizing would necessarily say themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's an
And that can
interesting
feel
thing.
so disconnected. It is. And I've been where you're reading it, it's like a generic template, and you wonder if they're talking about the same person you knew, and it can get a little grotesque or performative or like a charade or something unreal, which
or
I think
like
most of us on this call.
Or like an unrealized fantasy of really loving that person or being loved by that person, right?
Right on.
Oh, I think we could have a whole hour conversation about the obituary.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, way
There's
to
a lot
drop that
to
bomb,
that.
Rebecca.
Yeah.
That's beautiful though. Right. There's a lot to that. Right on. And again, here, making the mega point here is all this detail is fascinating. There is no right or wrong in so much of this stuff, but you just don't get to this juice unless you dare to go there. So, Lisa, thank you so much for helping us go there, my friend. Your work is beautiful. I love those decks. You've made a hard thing less hard and more fun and more beautiful. So thank you. And please come back and join us
I
again.
loved our conversation, and
Yeah.
thank you everyone who's chimed in and asked questions. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Lisa.
everybody.
Thanks everyone for being here. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.